September of 1931. A maintenance worker named Calvin Pruitt pried open a service panel on the basement level of the Harrington Grand Hotel in Louisville, Kentucky, looking for a gas line that had been leaking into the laundry room since the previous Tuesday. The panel was behind a steel utility shelf that had not been moved in years. You could tell by the rust marks on the concrete floor where the feet had never shifted. Behind the panel was a corridor, not a utility corridor, a corridor with finished walls, tile underfoot, and doors on both sides, each one bricked up from the inside. The corridor ran approximately 80 feet before ending at a wall of solid masonry that was newer than everything around it. Pruitt went back for a lantern. He counted 9 doors. He could not find a single one that had been sealed from the outside. Each one had been bricked shut by someone already inside the space those doors had once opened into. He did not find the gas line. He spent the rest of that afternoon in the corridor making notes in a plumber's log he carried in his chest pocket. When he brought the log to his supervisor the following morning, the supervisor read it, set it down, picked up the telephone, and made a call that Calvin Pruitt was not permitted to hear. Pruitt was transferred to a different work site before the end of that week. He never went back. He kept the log. The official record of the Harrington Grand's lower-level infrastructure, filed with the Louisville Department of Public Works in 1912 when the building underwent its last major renovation, shows 2 basement levels, a service level and a boiler level. It does not show a third. It does not show a corridor. It does not show 9 brick doorways. When Calvin Pruitt attempted to discuss what he had found with a building inspector he knew personally, the inspector told him that what he described could not exist in the Harrington Grand because he, the inspector, had been inside those walls during the 1912 renovation, and there was nothing there. That inspector had not worked the 1912 renovation. Pruitt checked the labor records himself. The inspector's name appeared nowhere in them. Pruitt was not a conspiracy-minded man. He was a licensed plumber with 14 years of municipal work history and no recorded disputes with any employer. He was not given to fantasy. He was a man who had been told that something he found with his own hands did not exist, by a man who claimed to have been present at a time when he was not present. Pruitt kept the log for the remainder of his life. When he died in 1958, his daughter mailed a copy to the Louisville Courier-Journal. The paper acknowledged receipt. They never published it. Before we go further, if you find these buried investigations as compelling as I do, hit subscribe so the next one reaches you when it drops. The algorithm tends to bury this kind of research unless you tell it you want more of it. To understand what Calvin Pruitt found in the basement of the Harrington Grand, you have to understand what the Grand Hotels of America actually were during the period when most of them were built. Between roughly 1870 and 1915, more than 400 large-scale hotels were constructed in American cities. Not the modest boarding houses that had existed before, but genuine architectural monuments. Buildings of 5, 8, 10 stories with hundreds of rooms, grand lobbies, electric lighting, hydraulic elevators, and subterranean infrastructure that dwarfed what was visible above street level. The official story of these buildings is the story of American prosperity and industrialization. Wealth moving, cities growing, a newly moneyed class requiring accommodation in the European tradition. That story is true as far as it goes. But it does not explain the subterranean architecture. It does not explain why so many of these buildings, not all of them, but a significant and specific subset, were constructed with lower levels that do not appear in any permit filing, any inspection record, or any publicly available building plan. It does not explain why the contractors who built those lower levels were, in case after case, sourced not from local labor pools, but from out-of-state firms that dissolved or relocated within 2 years of completing their work. To understand why subgrade spaces in these buildings matter, why the brick doors and the sealed corridors and the ventilated chambers matter, you need to understand what was happening beneath American cities during exactly the same decades these hotels were being built. The 1870s through the 1900s were a period of intense subterranean construction across the country. Sewer systems, telegraph conduit networks, early electrical infrastructure, pneumatic dispatch tunnels. The cities being built above ground required enormous underground systems to function, and those systems were being designed and contracted by entities that operated largely outside of public oversight. Most urban residents of that period had no reliable knowledge of what existed beneath the streets they walked on. The permit systems were new, inconsistently enforced, and riddled with exemptions for what was classified as private property subgrade improvement. In that environment, the environment of a nation that was simultaneously building its first modern infrastructure and doing so with almost no transparency, something could be built beneath a hotel and exist for decades without appearing in any document that a curious inspector, a journalist, or a future researcher would ever have legitimate access to. The question is not whether the technical capacity existed to build hidden subgrade floors beneath major hotels. It plainly did. The question is who commissioned them, who knew they were there, and what they were built to contain. There is a name that appears in the construction records of at least 14 major American hotels built between 1878 and 1901. The name is not an architect's name. It is not a developer's name. It is the name of a contracting firm, the Meridian Subgrade Construction Company, incorporated in 1876 in the state of Delaware. Operating address listed as a law office in Wilmington that closed in 1903. Meridian Subgrade held contracts on hotels in Cincinnati, St. Louis, Kansas City, Indianapolis, Nashville, and 4 cities in the Mid-Atlantic corridor. Their work, in every documented case, covered only the subterranean portions of the buildings they were hired on. The superstructure was handled by local firms. The basement levels, and in several cases the sub-basement levels, belonged exclusively to Meridian. The company kept no public accounts, filed no trade association membership, and placed no advertisements in any industry publication of the period. They appeared on contracts, completed the work, and dissolved. Finding Meridian Subgrade took a researcher named Arthur Vance nearly a decade of cross-referencing hotel construction ledgers across 6 states. Vance was a retired civil engineer from Dayton, Ohio, who began the research in 1966 as a personal project after noticing an anomaly in the construction file for the Dayton Imperial Hotel, a building in which he had personally supervised a mechanical system upgrade in 1961, and in which he had found, beneath the documented lowest floor, a sealed concrete chamber with no door and no utility purpose he could identify. Vance compiled his findings into a typed document of 118 pages, which he submitted to the Society for Industrial Archaeology in 1974. The Society did not publish it. They returned it with a letter noting that the submission did not meet the evidentiary standards for publication. The letter offered no specifics. Vance wrote back asking which standards precisely had not been met. He received no reply. He died in 1981. His 118-page document was found in his estate and donated to a small Ohio historical archive, where it sat undigitized and uncatalogued for more than 30 years. The Meridian Subgrade connection is where the story stops being an oddity and starts being a pattern. In 1889, a building inspector named George Halverson was assigned to conduct a routine structural evaluation of the lower levels of the Beaumont Hotel in Kansas City, Missouri. Halverson had been in building inspection for 19 years. He had certified the subgrade infrastructure of 63 structures across 3 counties. He was, by every account in his professional record. A careful and methodical man who did not deviate from procedure and did not write things in official filings that he had not personally verified. Halverson's evaluation report, filed March 7, 1889, covers 2 subgrade levels in standard language: load-bearing assessments, moisture observations, drainage notes. It is 9 pages long. A carbon copy of that same report, recovered from Halverson's personal files when his house was sold in 1944, is 11 pages long. The final 2 pages, absent from the official filing, describe a 3rd subgrade level that Halverson accessed through a hatch behind the coal storage room. He described the space as dry, finished, ventilated through a shaft he could not locate the terminus of, and divided into 8 compartments, each sealed with a steel door and a lock of a type he had never encountered in 19 years of building inspection work. Halverson noted that the ventilation shaft was active, meaning air was moving through it, despite the fact that the heating system did not reach that depth, and no mechanical ventilator of any kind appeared on the building's engineering drawings. He noted this twice. He also noted that the floor of the corridor between the compartments showed wear patterns consistent with regular foot traffic, not construction traffic, regular, ongoing use. His recommendation in those final 2 pages was that the Beaumont's ownership be required to submit revised building plans reflecting the actual subgrade configuration. That recommendation never appeared in the official filing. 2 pages simply were not there. But here is what makes the Halverson account different from every other case of a single inspector finding something that was later excised from the record. 3 years after Halverson filed his report, a second inspector named Morris Crane was sent to the Beaumont for what the assignment log described as a follow-up drainage assessment. Crane's report, filed in 1892, is 6 pages. It covers 2 subgrade levels. It makes no reference to a 3rd. It makes no reference to steel compartment doors. It makes no reference to active ventilation. Crane and Halverson had never met. Halverson had retired from inspection work by 1892. He did not know a second inspection had been conducted. He did not know what it found, or rather what it claimed not to find. When Halverson's son discovered the carbon copy of the full report among his father's belongings in 1944 and compared it to the official city filing, the 2-page discrepancy was precise, not approximate, exact. Someone had the original. Someone knew exactly which 2 pages to remove. St. Paul, Minnesota, 1897. Workers hired to install electrical conduits in the sub-basement of the Northfield Grand encounter a wall of brick that does not appear on any construction drawing. The foreman requests the original plans from the building owner's attorney. The attorney responds that the relevant drawings are held by the construction firm. The construction firm named is Meridian Subgrade, which dissolved in 1895. The conduit installation is completed around the wall. No one files an inquiry. No one amends the building plans. Memphis, Tennessee, 1903, a plumbing crew breaks through a basement wall during pipe replacement and finds a staircase descending to a level below the recorded lowest floor. The staircase ends at a steel door. The door has no handle on the side they are standing on. The building manager is called. He examines the staircase for approximately 4 minutes. He orders the wall bricked back up that same afternoon, using materials he personally sourced from a supplier the crew had never worked with before. When the lead plumber asks for the work order to be amended to reflect the discovery, the building manager tells him the amendment is not necessary because what they found was a utility access point, fully documented, not relevant to the plumbing scope. No documentation of that access point exists in any filing this building ever made. Indianapolis, Indiana, 1906, during the demolition of the Claypool Hotel's original East Wing to make room for an expansion. Workers clearing the sub-basement discover a section of corridor that does not connect to any part of the building's documented floor plan. The corridor runs 60 feet and terminates in a wall of brick laid in a pattern, alternating courses of different aged material that the demolition foreman later described to a family member as looking like it had been rebuilt more than once. The section is demolished. The foreman's observation appears in no official record. His grandson mentioned it to a local historian in 2004. This is not coincidence. This is a pattern. The American Hotel Protective Association, a trade body that existed from 1882 to 1931, received, in 1906, a formal inquiry from a journalist named Clement Ward, who was researching a piece on hotel construction anomalies for a Chicago periodical. Ward asked specifically about the practice of constructing subgrade levels that did not appear in public permit filings, and about the relationship between several major hotel chains and the Meridian Subgrade Construction Company. The association responded that the inquiry fell outside the scope of their membership records. Ward had already confirmed through separate research that at least 3 of the association's board members at that time were investors in hotels where Meridian had worked. The piece Ward was writing was never published. He submitted it to 3 publications. All 3 declined without explanation. Ward died in 1919 during the influenza epidemic. His research files were held by his widow until her death in 1944, and were then dispersed among family members who did not understand their significance. A partial collection surfaced at an estate sale in Evanston, Illinois, in 1997. The American Hotel Protective Association has never explained why its records from the period 1882 to 1912 are substantially incomplete in the areas that would cover construction oversight and permit compliance. It has never explained why the permit records for hotel construction in 7 major American cities show the same anomaly, subterranean work, filed under a separate permit category that was eliminated from public archive access between 1920 and 1935 in every city where it existed. It has never explained why the Meridian Subgrade Construction Company's Delaware incorporation papers list no individual principals by name, only a registered agent who died in 1891, and yet the company continued operating by its own construction contracts for a full decade after that agent's death. Why would a construction company working exclusively on the buried portions of buildings operate for 25 years without a single public-facing record? No advertisements, no trade association filings, no listed principals, and yet appear by name in the binding legal contracts of 14 separate hotel construction projects across 6 states. Why would an active building inspector excise 2 pages from his own report before filing it with the city, unless the alternative, leaving those pages in, was worse than the professional risk of removing them? Why would 9 doors be bricked shut from the inside? That last question is the one that stays. Because the mechanics of it require a person, or more than one person, to enter a space, seal every exit from within, and then not leave, unless there was another way out that Calvin Pruitt, with his lantern and his plumber's log, did not find. For the 6 years after his transfer, Pruitt attempted to return to the Harrington Grand on 2 occasions. The first time, in 1935, he presented his old work credentials at the service entrance and was told the building had no record of his prior employment. Not that his records were unavailable, but that he had never worked there. His name appeared in the Louisville Municipal Plumbing Registry for 9 consecutive years, with the Harrington Grand listed as an active work site. The Harrington Grand's internal employment records, the only records that would have contradicted the building manager's claim, were destroyed in a flood in 1937. Both of the lower service levels of the Harrington Grand were decommissioned and sealed with concrete in 1939 during a renovation the building's ownership described in a brief Courier Journal notice as a structural modernization. No permit was filed for the concrete work. It is the only major renovation the building underwent that left no trace in the city's construction archive. The Harrington Grand was demolished in 1967. Pruitt was still alive. He would have been 71. There is no record that anyone told him. The official history of the American Grand Hotel tells us these buildings were monuments to commerce and hospitality, built to accommodate a traveling public and reflect the ambitions of a growing nation. What the plumber's logs, the carbon copies, the dissolved construction companies, and the systematically incomplete permit archives tell us is that something else was also being built, in the levels below the boiler rooms, behind the walls that no inspector's drawing ever showed, in the spaces where the doors were bricked shut from the wrong side. We cannot tell you with certainty what those spaces were used for. What we can tell you is that the effort required to ensure you would never find out was not small, was not accidental, and did not stop at any one city or any one decade. These records survive because people like Calvin Pruitt carried their logs home in their chest pockets and kept them in drawers for the rest of their lives. Subscribe and share this with someone who still asks why. History does not disappear when it is buried. It disappears when the last person who was there stops talking about it. Next week, I am following the Meridian Subgrade Trail to a name that appears in the Delaware Incorporation filings of 6 other companies, all of them dissolved before 1910, all of them operating in the subgrade space beneath major civic buildings. A lawyer named Frederick Goss, 1877. One client. You will not want to miss it.